I'd like to call the meeting of the Tuesday, May 28th Board of Selectmen meeting to order and make the announcement that in accordance with the open meeting law, this meeting is being recorded. Is anyone else recording this meeting as well? None being seen. Could we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. In accordance with our agenda for the first meeting after the town elections, there is always, the first item on the agenda is always the reorganization of the Board of Selectmen. So that being said, until there is a new chairman, the town manager takes over just that one item, and then we'll turn over the election for the vice chair to the chairman who is elected. So with that being said, I'd like to open the nominations for chairman, and do we have any nominations? Mrs. Goodrich.
Thank you. I'm happy to nominate Mr. Holstrom as chairman.
Second that.
Do we have any additional nominations? That being said, we have a nomination for Mr. Holstrom as chair, and we have a second on that, so we're going to take a vote by roll call for Mr. Holstrom to be chair. Mr. Liberty?
Yes.
Mr. Bertha?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Holstrom?
Yes.
Mrs. Goodrich?
Yes.
That's, I'm going to turn it over to you, but before I do, I'm just going to hold it for 1 minute. I just want to make sure I thank you for being the chairman for the past year, and it's just been a pleasure working with you. I speak on behalf of all of town administration. You've been a great chair, a great leader for the Board of Selectmen, and we appreciate everything you've done for us.
Thank you. I appreciate
Now
those
I'll
kind words.
Gladly turn it over.
Mr. Holstrom, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to the board for your confidence in me to take over as chairman for the year. The next thing we have on is to have open the nominations for vice chair. And I'll ask for any nominations for vice chair.
I'll nominate Mr. Carpenter for vice chair.
I'll second.
Okay, motion been made and seconded for Mr. Carpenter for vice chair. Is there any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, the nominations are closed, and by roll call vote, Mr. Liberty.
Yes.
Mr. Berthium.
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Holstrom says yes. Mrs. Goodrich.
Yes.
Thank you. Congratulations, all. Okay, first we have tonight is public comments, and it looks like a clear slate, so we'll move on to the next.
For sure.
First of the public hearings that we have is an application for 567 Southbridge Street in Auburn. It's the RAMDEV, and we have the documents in front of us, and I'd like to have a motion to open the hearing.
So moved. Second.
Okay, motion been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Are there representatives here?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Board. My name is Matthew Porter. I'm the attorney for RAMDEV, Inc.
My name is Bharat Kumar Patel.
Okay.
So, Mr. Patel is the President, Treasurer, Secretary, Director, also the proposed license holder for the package store. This relates to the sale of Jake's Variety, so it's a transfer of the beer and wine license associated with that. Mr. Patel will be the license manager, be working at the store 40 hours a week. He comes with almost a decade of experience in the liquor and retail industry, so certainly understands the responsibilities that come along with the sale of alcohol. He's tip certified, hasn't had any violations at any of his other stores. So no major structural changes to the store, no changes to the floor plan of the location. There's a slight tweaking of hours that are permissible within the town, and they'll be changing the name to Auburn Beer, Wine, and Vape. So just a change in name as well. But no major changes.
Just as part of this application, I did notice that there was a letter sent to the abutters that everybody in that area has been notified of this change of name in the application.
Yeah, it was noticed in the paper. For a transfer of a license, the ABCC does not require a butter notification. So I'm not sure whether the town sent them out or not, but the state does not require it. So if it's a transfer and the store is staying the same, it's just a newspaper notice, which was taken care of by the town.
Any board members have any questions? Comments? Mrs. Goodrich?
Thank you, Mr. Holstrom. Could you just tell me a little bit about, I know you said he has extensive experience. Could you just tell me a little bit about your experience of, specifically of your practice with identifying people in service of alcohol?
Well, I have a store in Shrewsbury, 507 Boston Turnpike, already almost 5 years ago. We have still right now. So I used to work over there too, also manager.
Okay, and what's your standard practice to ensure that you don't sell to underage customers?
I have a special machine for a scan ID, every customer, after I sell it. We have special machine, I have like $5,000 cost machine. So when you come customer, ask ID, I put a machine, completely is right, after you sell it over there too, same thing up.
And how many employees will you have that will be checking these IDs?
Right now, this right now store is very slow with this, so I'm working myself 40 hours a week. Yeah, and after busy, so I hire employee, you know.
And if you get additional employees, will you make it a practice to
Yeah,
card everyone?
Tip certified, yeah.
I guess just as a follow-up, will you be training them, or will you have outside training for those individuals that are going to be doing the business?
The tip certification?
Yeah, so he'll train them, but there's a tip certification. That's what he said is
But
required.
then
so-
will you have an ongoing, just a meeting with your employees to let them know?
Yeah, okay, I'll teach you an online certificate again.
This board traditionally has looked into that very seriously. We want to be sure that, all bases are covered with that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have just another question.
Yeah, just, go ahead and follow up, and then I'll...
So is it your plan to just have the beer, wine, and vaping
Convenience store, yeah.
supplies, or will you have the additional convenience supplies?
Same thing, whatever Jack right now sells, same thing, I never change, nothing change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Berkeley, please.
I just noticed the vape at the end of the name. So you've been selling vape products all along?
Now just convenience store, whatever sell right now, Jack, I sell same thing, no
So
change.
they're currently sold at the store, if that's the
They're currently
question.
sold in the
Yes,
store?
correct. Yeah, so there's no product changes to what's
Yeah,
being
no
sold.
product change, yeah.
Mr. Little Liberty.
Through the chair, just out of curiosity, the scanners that you use for IDs, for out-of-state licenses, do they work for those as well?
Yeah, so that out-of-state scanner, which a lot of our clients use, so it's state-of-the-art, it consistently updates its software, so
Software
it's trying to stay
every
ahead
month I
of,
pay like $60 something.
yeah, so it tries to stay ahead of any of the fake IDs, but obviously there's a human element to it, they have to ask for identification, which these guys certainly will, but it's very helpful in deterring any use of fake IDs.
Has anybody got anything else? Okay, motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the license, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all the conditions stated upon them. Failure to comply with any and all conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Anything by you before we take a vote? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, and good luck to you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
coming in. The next we have on our agenda is presentation by Eastland Partners on the proposed multifamily workforce development. I would like to, at this time, ask for a motion to move up item 7A, which is under the town manager's items and regarding the same subject.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded to move up item 7A. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you for moving that up. If I can just, by way of introduction, you will be hearing shortly from Mr. Logan Huffman and from Clay Williams from Eastland Partners, who we have met with Mr. Huffman a couple of years ago on a subdivision plan that he is currently working on. And most recently, town administration met with Eastland Partners and Mr. Huffman and Mr. Williams to discuss a proposed workforce housing project at the similar location, not on that exact lot, but right abutting the current subdivision lot. At that time, we had asked Eastland Partners to do a lot of research for us in order to better understand what this project is, so that we feel when they come to you, which they are tonight, with a presentation on their project, it will give you the opportunity to digest what the project's all about and understand the impacts on police, fire, schools, and DPW. And Mr. Huffman can explain this in greater detail than I, but the proposal, the Eastland Partners was looking to the Board of Selectmen, not this evening, but at a future short-term date, to take a position on whether the town would be willing to work on an LIP, which is a local initiative project, which is a so-called friendly 40B project, would be willing to work with Eastland Partners to proceed along that line versus a pure 40B project where the board wouldn't have to participate in that. So that is the reason that they're here this evening. We have met with them through a, I would say, a partial DCG. We did not have the entire DCG because we just wanted the opportunity internally to have everybody on the town's team just really ask a lot of questions, understand it, and come back to the developer with some of the concerns that we had or issues that we felt would be raised publicly. So by the time they came to you this evening, hopefully they've addressed most, if not all, of the questions that we're anticipating may be asked, but tonight is the opportunity for all of us to see the final presentation, ask any questions, and again, we're not suggesting a vote this evening. We will put it on a future agenda. Just wanted to give you the opportunity. It's a massive lot of information to absorb, so wanted to give you plenty of opportunity to hear that tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Huffman, and I know Mr. Williams just passed out just a map to show you the site that they're looking at, and then the slides, if my recollection serves me, they are all numbered, so you will be able to go back, and those were in your packet as well, so you can follow through with your packet. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Julie. Mr. Chairman, member of the board, my name's Logan Huffman with Eastland Partners. My company, we've been in business for 30 years consecutively in Eastern Mass. I'm going to try and move really quickly tonight. As Julie says, there's a lot of information to cover. Our hope is the big picture in all of this, that over time, our goal is to essentially create a partnership with the town Board of Selectmen as the, I guess the top people in town, as I say, and to come together to move forward and develop workforce housing. And what it does is it creates a partnership that it's more where we work together with the community, as opposed to the traditional, what you've all heard about when people talk about 40B and that type of thing. Typically, people run for the hills. The typical process in a 40B is where the applicant, the developer, makes a proposal to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and under statute of the comprehensive permit law, you move forward, and many people would say that it's just kind of a steamroller approach, that you push through the whole thing, the town doesn't have a whole lot to say in it, and the result is the result. Rather than that, what our hope is here is to move forward and do what's called a local initiative development, as I say, where we work together with the community. We go into the project, everybody gets a real good understanding, hopefully in a short amount of time, number of meetings, a lot of information. The board can get comfortable with our proposal and say, yes, we support this, we believe it makes sense for Auburn, the entire community of Auburn, and with that endorsement, then we move forward to the next phase, which is more the traditional, is we move through the process for the actual permitting with the Zoning Board of Appeals. So it's really an opportunity where things get ferreted out to the community. It's a better forum where if there are things we can do for the community, that really gets looked at up front, and we can all kind of have the give and take and the wish list and all. And ultimately what happens is everybody can win. So all of that will come. We're not going to spend a lot of time tonight on the actual development. The big picture, though, for the whole community, of which, when you look at it as the Board of Selectmen, you represent the entire town. It's the big picture. What does this mean to Auburn? So some people, developers come forward. They're saying they want to develop a 250-unit workforce apartment complex. What does that mean to Auburn? What's it going to cost us? Is it going to cost us? Are we going to make money? What's that going to look like? So we felt, and with Julie's recommendation, that really the first piece of this we should address is what that looks like. So we've spent a lot of time, we've looked at things really closely, and my associate Clay here is going to get up and he's going to run through a presentation of a lot of information. I think you all have hard copies of everything, and you'll find that what we've done is, for what it's worth, the numbers we're going to present tonight are real. You can push them this way some or push them that way some, because there will be people as we go forward that like it. There'll be people that dislike it. But the numbers, everything we've developed, are from unbiased sources that, just work with the hardcore numbers. And as we tweak it from there, I hope you'll find that what we've put together shows that this development is good for Auburn. It's good for central Massachusetts, because I think we all read the newspaper. We have a real housing crisis going on, and this is a way we can get housing built. So I'll turn it over to Clay, and he can talk about the technical stuff. Thank you.
Okay. Chairman of the Board, I'm Clay Williams with Eastland Partners. As it was already said, you have an information packet that I've provided, and the slide numbers will correlate to the numbers on the right side. Those have all of my sources and a brief narrative kind of to discuss what's being said between the lines. So, how are municipal impacts measured? I looked at objective data. So these are hard numbers, these are facts, these are not opinionated statements. Some are easier to understand and measure, but at the end of the day, there's backing behind just about everything I say. Most of the time, this is a really negative conversation. People are worried about increases in school children, potential congestion and accidents, and strain on municipal services like police and fire. So the reserve, as it was said, is a workforce housing development. This is a rendering from our architect that shows what the actual buildings will look like. Each one of the rectangles on the site plan that I've provided you will be one of these, three-story garden court style. Here is our breakdown of bedrooms. It'll be predominantly 1 and 2 bedrooms, with 10% of the overall development having 3-bedroom units as a requirement for state financing. So, like it's been said, we're going to cover a lot of data here, and I apologize in advance. Some of it is not the most legible on this screen, but as you look back through it and compare it to the annotated bibliography, I hope it'll all make sense. So, we'll start off with school children. They tend to be the most costly externality of development. I use data from this company called eConsult Solutions. They're based out of Pennsylvania, and their community data analytics team looks at who moves into housing in different states. So we have 2 types of data here, one for 5+ multi-unit developments, and another that looks at rental developments. These are broken down either per bedroom or just for that type. These are our numbers here at the bottom. When you take these numbers and multiply them by the 250 units at the reserve, we get either 62 school-age children from the rental multiplier or 44 from our multifamily multiplier. If we average these out, we're looking at 53 school-age children, Divided across 12 grades, that comes out to just over 4 students per grade, which would be easily addressed with existing capacity. So how much does this cost? Through a conversation with Mary Ellen Brunel at the Superintendent of Schools, we looked at the total budget and divided that by the number of pupils in the school system. The total cost comes to right under $12,500, but after you look at the Chapter 70 aid package, the true cost to the town is just over $8,200. There are a lot of other funding sources that aren't taken into account here. Auburn hasn't really seen a lot of funding because there hasn't been a lot of growth over the past 10 years. Back in 2009, you were awarded over $600,000 from the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. So at the end of the day, for the cost of the school systems, we're looking at just over $430,000, multiplying 53 by that 8,200 figure. As I said before, the actual number would likely be lower than this because we're proposing multifamily housing, and that rental multiplier takes into account all housing types, and single-family homes are where families tend to locate. And there's a lot more going on here with the education system at large and in Auburn. So these are a couple of graphs that look at changes in funding. If we start at the bottom here on the right-hand side, this looks at the local contribution in town, the target compared to what you were actually spending. About 10 years ago, back in 2007, you were required to spend almost 20% more than what you were targeted at. Now, things have started to even out, kind of identifying more state importance on Auburn school systems. Looking at the graph on the top here, there hasn't really been a whole lot of change in funding other than increasing Chapter 78. There are a whole bunch of other different funding sources here that could come into play, with new students in town. So what else is going on in education? More and more kids are going to private and charter educations, just about 17% in all of Massachusetts. Just over 3% of kids are being homeschooled. Trade and vocational educations are also becoming more important. Just because we have a better understanding of student learning abilities, not everybody does West in a public school classroom. So moving forward, we could see the number being somewhere, 20% lower. So now we'll shift gears and talk about traffic. Traffic's measured in level of service, which is LOS moving forward. The way the traffic is measured is you look at intersections and roads that are existing right now, and then you compare that to either build conditions, so when the reserve is actually completed and you see 250 new homes, and then you compare that to what would happen just with regular increases in traffic over the years. So this level of service is basically just a way that measures the function of a roadway. It's scaled A through F, pretty much just like school. A is the best rating and F is the worst. Here are the intersections that we studied. These were determined in conjunction with the town engineer and the District 3 highway engineer from Mass DOT. Our proposed access roads to get in and out of the community are shown in blue here. Our report card here is really strong. We have A's, B's, and C's throughout. All the roadways that operate kind of at a lower level of service, which is still totally acceptable, are within Route 20 and Route 12. The traffic study is provided with an Adobe Cloud link in your packet in front of you. And it's also important to note that when we did this traffic study, we actually oversized it by about 20%. So we were looking at over 300 units instead of the 250 that we're proposing now. So in terms of roadways and the DPW, all the infrastructure and all the pavement within the community will be owned by the reserve, so the town doesn't carry any maintenance costs. It's not worrying about plowing or salting in the winter. That's all taken care of by the community. Obviously, construction vehicles and residential traffic will have some impact on the roadways. We'll look at those costs a little bit later. So now talking about public safety, we'll look at impact on police and fire. We'll look at some of the characteristics of the site and accessibility, who potentially could be living here, the capacity and location of emergency services. We'll talk about our management company and some statutes from the state. The usual way of looking at these impacts is at a per household cost figure. That number in alone is not really representative of most conditions, so there's a little bit of change going in here. There we go. So here's the site plan that I've provided in front of you. The red star up in the right here is existing fire station. So for EMS services, response times would be really quick. Through talk with Captain Greg Moran at the Community Risk Reduction Bureau, they're mainly looking at, is there enough space for fire trucks and emergency vehicles to get in and maneuver around the site and put out any potential fires if they happen. Because this is new construction, it'll have all the most current fire suppression techniques. The property is going to be managed by Wingate Properties. They're a huge national company that's based in Massachusetts. They have a portfolio of over 10,000 units that they manage, and this is really their cream of the crop. Everybody who lives in a reduced rate unit is chosen through a lottery process with a strict background check, just to make sure that anybody living here will be a good fit for the community. So local preference is a guideline from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and it basically sets aside the reduced rate units for people who are already in the town of Auburn. The current categories are residents of Auburn now, municipal employees like your firefighters, your police officers, your school teachers, administrative staff, people who work in Auburn but might live somewhere else, and then children who are already attending the locality schools. Through review of some other 40B projects, it's commonly seen that over 50% of the pupils who live at these communities are moving from somewhere within the town, so they don't actually put any more cost on the school system. So now we'll look at police and fire interaction with residential property in town. I pulled up the Auburn police blotter and looked at a couple of days, midweek, weekend, holidays, and so forth. I found there to be an average of 60 calls per day. Just about 10 of those were directly related to residences. A lot of them were also traffic stops that were closely related to businesses. And other studies that I've read just kind of confirm that non-residential development places a lot more strain on public safety, just because of the fact that at a certain time when the business is closed, the area tends to vacate, and when you don't have eyes in the street, that's when kind of non-ideal activities start to happen. So now getting into the cost estimate portion of the presentation, like I said before, we're using a per household cost, which takes the total budget and divides it by the number of households in town. One of the big limitations here is that it assumes no other funding sources. Property tax in Auburn right now is 67% residential, so 33% of that funding is coming from your commercial and industrial and personal property taxes. There's also state aid that goes in here in various forces. And currently right now, property tax accounts for 52% of all costs to run school and government. So with communities like these with kind of large property tax revenues every year, they'll look to increase that number. So like I said before, for every $100,000 spent on these services, 67 of that is coming from residential sources, and 33 is coming from the commercial and industrial property taxes. So starting off with police, I took the total budget from the fiscal year 19 number, divided that by the number of households from the census. You end up with just over $160,000. Typical methodology in municipal impact analyses would be adjusting for efficiency. So first, you multiply out the residential share at 67%, and for public safety services, their efficiency adjustment is 75%, just because there is some lag that goes into account when more people move into town. A similar thing with fire, it's measured in the same way, a little bit less money with just over $105,000. And the DPW has a much lower efficiency adjustment, just because, well, first of all of our infrastructure is owned and maintained by the community, so that doesn't place any more burden. and also there's just a lag that goes into account with more roadway traffic. And as foreseen by our traffic study, there aren't going to be any major issues that happen here. It's just increases in regular traffic. So, like I said, this just shows the ways that municipal services interact with new housing. One example that's commonly used are parades. Whether 100 people or 1,000 people show up, it's still the same parade. The town clerk is also pretty similar. Just because new housing ends up in town, you don't have to hire a whole new clerk. Maybe there's an assistant that needs to come on board, but that happens at less cost. So now we'll talk about kind of the planning perspective of housing in Massachusetts. So every town is mandated at 10% with your subsidized housing inventory, which basically just shows that you have housing stock set aside for reduced rate tenants. Auburn right now is just over 3.5% with 251 units. You have made significant strides with senior housing with the 2 school redevelopments that are going on. Since those are rental housing, every single one of those units will add to your SHI. Similarly, with the reserve, all 250 units are going to count. So at the end of the day, once this project goes through, you'll be looking at 9.1%, just basically all the way towards your mandated minimum. A housing production plan is something that Auburn has, and it's a way for you as a town to take your future into your own hands. If a town can set aside a yearly housing production goal of affordable housing, these 2 strong benefits are realized. First, you become appeal-proof for a period of up to 2 years. So if another 40B project is proposed and it's in the wrong neighborhood or there are infrastructure concerns, you as a town have the power to put the kibosh on that. And also, you're given priority for certain state funds. As noted per your housing production plan, your goal is just 34 units a year, which is easily attainable with these 3 projects. Another important part to consider with multifamily housing is it puts less strain on the land developed. So we have a 64-acre site here. We're only going to develop 8.7 acres. The rest of that space will stay open as it is now. When you look at green space in Auburn, it's really more concentrated towards the southern portion and also on the west-hand side, and this will just kind of increase green space for the whole entire community to use. So, in a bigger picture, I'm sure as you all have heard and read in the news, we have a housing crisis. We have some of the best universities in the world, and a lot of our college students are kind of picking up and leaving after they graduate because they can't afford to live here. I've seen a lot of it with my friends. You know, in a lot of places you can just buy a lot more house and live a better lifestyle in other parts of the country. Over half of the people who live on the eastern side of Massachusetts drive over an hour to work each way, which is really just unnecessary. And finally, housing development is a form of economic development. Our economy is growing, and if we don't have any place to house our workers, you know, we'll be in real trouble moving forward. And Governor Baker recently filed legislation for over 130,000 new units in the next 6 years. So now we'll get into the actual dollars and cents here. Looking at the auto excise tax for fiscal year 19, dividing that out by the number of households, you end up with just about $403. We have 250 new homes in this community with 1.5 cars per unit. Not every space will be filled here, but since this is the community core, we're looking at somewhere around 1.5 cars. So this will bring over $150,000 into the town. Now we're looking at real estate tax revenue. Looking at the current rate from the assessor, our project is valued at $50 million. When you multiply that out, you're looking at over $920,000 a year. Here are our sewer figures. Our permits and connection fees will total just over $280,000, and the yearly usage and treatment costs will net the town just over $11,000. So here's our total cost figures. You're looking at just $600,000. Once the project is stabilized and everybody's moved in, you're looking at just under $1.1 million each year. Here are one-time fees at over $500,000. And at the end of the day, the town of Auburn is looking at just over $480,000 a year in benefit from this community. Upon the first year of completion, those building permit and sewer fees will be assessed, so a little bit more money will happen then. But, since the value of real estate grows, these figures will increase over the years. This data right here is from We Are Apartments, which is a company from the National Multifamily Housing Coalition. They look at the total direct and indirect contribution of apartments on their communities. You're looking at just about $120 million yearly to the state economy and over 850 jobs. Every day in Massachusetts, apartments and their residents contribute over $55 million to the economy, and we want Auburn to get as much of that as possible. So Auburn is in kind of a special town. Most of the people who live in Auburn work somewhere else, and vice versa. A lot of the people who work here don't live in Auburn. And that's kind of the essence of what workforce housing is. We're trying to capture more of the people who are commuting in and out of Auburn to live here. It'll decrease traffic, increases your property taxes in town. And, I think just as a whole, it's kind of a better lifestyle to live closer to where you work. So, as part of the development process, we're usually looked at a conventional zoning subdivision. Here, we could support 40 dwelling units with 4 bedrooms. Based on the multipliers I previously provided, these could generate basically the same amount of school kids with 1/5 of the revenues. Since this would be a private community, all of the infrastructure would be owned and maintained by the town. That's almost 6,000 feet of road that you would have to plow and salt and maintain, and that could cost the town over $45,000 a year. Multifamily housing really does a good job at providing enough money for the services it takes up. Developments like this can really strain a town, and we feel that workforce housing, multifamily housing, and rental housing can ensure, a productive future for Auburn and for the Commonwealth. So talking about 40B kind of more generally, our lot sizes in New England are significantly larger than everywhere else in the country, which doesn't really seem to make any sense because we have the smallest amount of land area. When you look at pre-development costs, our land costs are also more than double just about everywhere else in the US. And that's what Chapter 40B is trying to get at. Our zoning isn't going to change as quickly as it would without these comprehensive permits. And based on this and all the numbers that I provided, we hope you can see kind of a good big picture view of the reserve and how it would work with the community. And with that, I guess I'd like to open it up for any questions.
Does any board members have any questions? Mr. Berthier?
Yeah, so looking at the map, we have kind of the reserve area and bright green. There's a darker green that goes all the way out to the turnpike. Is that all land that's owned by you?
Correct, yes.
And what is the plan for that? Is that just going to be open land?
Yes, correct. It will be left undeveloped.
And is that like land that you can put fields at some point in, or parks, or?
So there are a few trails that exist there now. So we were thinking we would rehab those and make those passive recreation walking trails, just because they're there now. I mean, fields are something that definitely could work.
A couple other questions, if I may, through the chair. So we're in the process, you showed us the red star where the West Street Fire Station is, and we're in the process of, in the next several years, looking at a public safety complex. But in the event that, maybe we could put like a two-bay, one ambulance, one police cruiser type of thing, where are you guys amenable to working with the town to maybe have like a small annex facility, if that made sense in our whole scheme of a public safety complex?
Let me answer that one. Exactly. I mean, it's, as I had said earlier, this process that we're trying to get going, we'd like to hear about all of these kind of things. That, you know, I won't say, you know, we could do everything of that, but for what you say at this point, yeah, it's definitely something we would be very interested in looking at as far as that goes.
And the last one is the question that I had, was the sewer. I mean, we know that we have an older sewer system in town, and it's been put together, and obviously a 250-unit complex is going to have some serious usage. So I don't know if the question is to you, or if it's more through the chair to the manager, town manager. Can that area handle that type of
Through the chair, I would turn to Mr. Huffman for his conversations with the engineers as well as on the private side.
I would say the best way is, you know, we've talked extensively and worked with Jeff at the Auburn Sewer Commission, and interestingly, sewer in our neighborhood there connects to a pump station, kind of sits behind the Sheldons right there. And that station was completely rebuilt within the last year. And I'm not 100% sure of the history of it, but essentially a year plus ago when I was talking with Jeff, he kind of basically said, yeah, we've already made all of the upgrades necessary, and we could easily handle, you know, anything that you would do in this area of town.
So that's feeding into Blackstone still? That's correct, yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Anything else? Yes, Mrs. Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgive me, I took lots of notes, so I may need to refer back. Can you tell me when the traffic study was done?
The traffic study was about a year ago, when, some real brief history, when we originally purchased the property. I'm sure many of you know that through the years it kind of has a history where originally it was going to be, there was going to be a road coming from Oxford, coming down, connecting with Albert Street out to Route 20, where the new controlled stop exists today. And back then, the plan was, and it was actually approved in 2009, that there was going to be 320 townhomes constructed in Oxford, and that roadway connection would have been basically the access to that property. So when we originally purchased the property and started looking big picture at everything, that's one of the first things we did, is we wanted to see what it would look like for traffic impacts. Not that we were looking to, you know, necessarily connect through the Oxford side, because we believe there's other ways to do that, but it just came up and made sense. Another thing I'll just briefly add, in the 40B process, there's a provision within it that says, depending upon the size of the community, when we originally started looking at this development, we felt, you know, this property could easily support over 300 apartments at this location. But there's a provision within 40B that a community, if a community is not supportive of the 40B development at that location, they can limit you down to, because of the size of the number of housing units today in town, at a maximum of 250. So that's kind of why we've made that adjustment. And I'll say for the record, it's something to think about, that, this site would actually, support more. That's where the number came from originally when we did the traffic study.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
So did you do a traffic study originally back when you got the permitting through Oxford, or they had planned on moving forward with those townhouses, and then you're saying an additional traffic study was done approximately a year ago?
Right, when we started our process, and today what we have is we have approval for a 5-lot residential subdivision, of which we're currently in process of building. And the first night that I came into the planning board, when we started, sometimes I've regretted it a little, I was honest, and I said what our ultimate goal is, because we believe this site is the perfect location for multifamily housing. So we reached out knowing that a traffic study would be necessary as we move forward. We reached out to Bill Coyle, the town engineer, and he, with Mass DOT, designated the location, said, if something like this is to happen, here are the intersections that we want to have you study. And we then moved forward, had those study, and the traffic study was developed from that. Just a little bit additional to that, what we found along the way, and the reason we haven't moved forward sooner formally, is, it's like anything. If you're professional about something, you need to have your ducks in order and know that everything is settled. And when we reached out to Auburn Water originally, they came back and they said, we can support some single-family, a small single-family development, but we've got problems with our wells in town, and until we get an additional water source, we don't have the water for the apartments. That made us do two things. We moved forward to look at developing a water source on our property so we can serve ourselves, which we have. And since then, we've also been kind of working with Auburn Water, and there's, I don't know if I'm speaking out of hand, but there's a kind of movement afoot in town to connect Auburn eventually with Worcester. We look at that as a cost. We can spend the money developing our own water system, or we could spend the money connecting Auburn to Worcester. And that's one of the things we've been looking at doing, and that's what we would do if all those things aligned as part of this development, which in that case, if we did that, that serves the entire community.
Chairman, I have
Yes.
about 3 questions.
Sure.
You talked about the impact on the schools. So I'm curious if you have any additional data on that. See that the impact would be approximately 53 students, going by your process, which would be 4 to 5 per grade. Do you have any additional data that shows that it actually impacts the grades equally, as opposed to a larger impact on elementary schools? My concern would be that there would be a larger impact on the elementary schools and not so much, on the upper grades. Do you have any additional data on that?
There isn't really any data that discriminates within the ages of children. There is a multiplier for public school-age children, but it doesn't necessarily cut it in between elementary and middle school and high school.
Please don't take any of my questions as not being,
No,
as
totally valid.
opposed to this. I'm just information gathering.
Right.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, hold on a second. You had talked about the local preference, 70%, and there were 4 categories.
Correct.
So is that, because we do have a concern for affordable housing in Auburn and local preference. Can you talk to me about how that is spread out through those 4 categories? Certainly, my preference would be, more preference given to current residents who have been
Right.
here for a long time, who are looking to stay in town. But you did identify 4 different categories for local preference.
Right. So those are just 4 categories that were put forward by the Department of Housing and Community Development. It's not to say it has to be evenly split. That's just saying, okay, we have 70% of our reduced rates units set aside. Anybody from these 4 categories could apply. You can't really discriminate within. It's kind of just saying, hey, if you meet one of these 4, there's a place for you at the reserve.
You actually, the way it works is, just as the word says, you get preference. What happens is you run lotteries, and in this situation, it's really part of us working together too. We earmark, we can say, we'd kind of like a little of this, a little more of that. We can do that, and then what happens is when the development's under construction and you have these lotteries to actually make the homes available, you can do your first one, you could say for police and fire, say that was your number 1. And go through it, the lottery happens. Of those, say there were additional people that came from police and fire that still wanted to be there, they automatically go into the next lottery, and then the next, and the next, even down to once you get beyond, the so-called local preference, you're still in it, so it's like the odds just get multiplied for you.
And I have one last question, if I may. Thank you.
Please.
So I have a question on the management and maintenance. Certainly, when the place is new, it's highly sought after. I mean, people like new landscaping, new buildings, new appliances. What's your plan, your track record on maintenance of this facility?
The big answer there is, as Clay said in his presentation, is Wingate Properties. We'll own the property, but surprisingly, we're smart, and we realize it's not what we do. I own other apartments, and Wingate manages them for me because they're professionals at what they do. And at the end of the day, it's that condition, the quality, all backs into the marketability of what you have. And as a property owner, the better your property is, the better your return on investment. I've been with Wingate about 10 years now, and every year they surprise me. They just, you go to the property and it's like it looks better every day. They come out annually with lists. It's time to redo this, redo the common area carpets, redo all of these things because we want to, in one community that's opened in 2006, so if you think it's not that long, we've already gone through and literally remodeled 80% of them to bring them up because times change. We've upgraded bathrooms, we've upgraded kitchens, and all of those things, which is all part of professional ownership and management of, multifamily housing, because it's like anything, you're competing in the marketplace, against everything else, and if you're the best, you get the best.
Anybody else want to take? Mr. LaLiberty.
Thank you. I was wondering, I have a couple of questions I'm going to try to get through. Are there any future plans to develop anywhere further past this area? I know you talked about adding or updating some of the trails. I didn't know if there was any future talk of somewhere down the road adding. I know you said that the land could support more than 300 units. I didn't know if that was in the...
No, we're not looking at that.
Back to Wingate, I was also wondering, do they manage all of the properties that you own?
Yes, the rental properties. We use different management companies. We also do a lot of condominium development, and we have different managers for those properties, which for us is typically, it's a transitional thing. we find, we develop, we construct, we sell the homes, and once you get to, by statute, 75% sell out of a condominium, you have to turn it over to the homeowners, and they bring in a management company.
And does Wingate, I don't know if you might have the answer to this, I was just wondering if they, where they operate throughout the state, or if they're national. I don't know much about them.
They're based in, their offices are in Newton, and, as I say, they're a national company. They have, most of their management holdings are here in New England, but they have developments that I know of in Atlanta and different places around the country.
My last big question was the parking for units. I was wondering how that would work out, if every unit would get a certain number of spots, or how, if there'd be visitor parking, something along, just some more information on that.
Statistically, the numbers for when you take, it's rare for, say, for example, a one-bedroom apartment to have more than one car. And the long and short of it, with the balance of the different unit types, you end up with a kind of a need, if you will, of 1.5 overall. And what we have in our proposal is 1.7. So we're making, available, guest parking and those types of things.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Anybody got anything else? Mr. Berthew?
Couple other things. So, coming out, does your property go out into Oxford at all? And are you having to deal with Oxford for any part of your development?
We own land in Oxford as well. It literally abuts on across the line. Boy, the Oxford gods. We're working with Oxford. When you cross over into Oxford, we own a 28-acre commercial property along Route 20. We're working with Mass DOT now for the realignment and the reconstruction of Route 20 that's going to go through Oxford into Charlton. And behind that, we also own the property that was formerly approved for the 320 townhomes.
Okay, so are you going to plan for this property to have an egress maybe out so that some cars could go out to Route 20 at Albert Street, but some could also go out to Route 20 at the Oxford end of things?
No, and the reason for that is there's no plan for a connection into Oxford at this location, because just fundamentally the way traffic patterns are and the way people's habits are. 90% of us, say from that area, we go east when we leave the property. So Auburn being east, there would be more coming from Oxford than there would be going that direction. So with what we're doing in Oxford, we're keeping all of the access in Oxford. And as we had said earlier, with all of our traffic study and everything, and it's an interesting read. Clay had mentioned that you have the attachment to look at it, because it's one of the things that I've heard for 30 years, it's the first thing that comes up. People say, oh, the traffic, oh, the traffic. And when you look at you have the morning commute hour and you have the evening commute hour, it's really interesting. If you look at it, 250 apartments seems like a huge number. But if you look at the real world, and I can say that a number of developments we've done through the years, we're always required we do traffic studies. A community that we did in Milford, which was 165 duplex condominiums. When we did the study, and this just kind of came up recently, back in 2006, it was projected that 165 homes would generate about 900 vehicle trips per 24-hour period. And we had reason about 3 or 4 months ago to go back and recount. Now the development's been done for 3+ years, everybody's all in and all, and the counts actually came back almost 15% lower. And so the numbers that the Institute of Traffic Engineers use are good numbers. And in this situation, if memory serves, in the morning peak hour, let's say, and the best place we'd all know is going Albert Street out to Route 20 at that new stoplight. These 250 apartments will add 2 cars per minute. Now think about that, 2 cars per minute. And I remember years ago I had a situation where I said, you know, let's see how long a minute is, let's have a minute of silence. It's a long time. So it's really, at the end of the day, you know, in many cases, these traffic impacts aren't, you know, in the real world what, you know, we think they are. So I just say that it's an interesting read to look at that stuff.
Each of the buildings, will they have elevators? Are they completely handicap accessible? Only certain percentages? Or?
The per ADA requirements, all of the apartments accessible at grade are all handicap accessible. Per the codes and all, these are what's called 3-story walk-ups. And so the 2nd and 3rd floor wouldn't, because these buildings will not have elevators.
And so, like, when we're talking about maybe placing some of our elderly, you know, maybe that want to stay in Auburn but get out of their homes, so most of the units geared toward like a 2-bedroom that are handicap accessible, or is there?
Well, the mix, there will be all unit types on every floor. And if you think about it as far as accessibility, at minimum, roughly 80 of the homes are handicap accessible.
And my last question, if you will, is pets. What are all the units pet accessible?
This will be a pet-friendly community.
Pet-friendly community?
We Americans these days love our pets.
And we're talking about a dog park in town, and if you find that there's going to be, you know, 250 dogs in this complex, will you put your own dog park on the facility?
That actually is part of our plan, to have, you know, like a small dog park area. You know, there'll be an extensive, you know, community center, there'll be a swimming pool and all kinds of different, you know, things of that nature as far as amenities go.
And the selectmen can use the pool, right? That's all I have, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Carpenter.
Just had a couple questions. Square footage across the 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms, what are you predicting in cost per month?
Oh. I'm probably not the one to answer that tonight. I would actually, because if I say it, I'm going to get some of the numbers wrong. Square footage of unit size, roughly in the 1 bedrooms, if memory serves, it's roughly 750 square feet, up to 2 bedrooms, I think, are at a little over like 950, and the 3s would be just over like 1,000, 1,050, if memory serves. Don't hold me to that. It's been a while since I spent a lot of time with this specific plan.
If you could get that for me, that'd be great.
Certainly.
If I may, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that you're going to maintain 50-plus acres. Are you going to give a deed restriction so that you cannot develop on the property? I mean, it's one thing to say it's not going to be developed, it's another thing to give the town the assurances that this 250 is 250 and it's not 300 or
Right.
whatever else the market may bear.
Well, I would say this, that the short answer is absolutely yes. We'd create, a restriction on the property so there's no further development. We've done it in a number of different communities.
One more, if I may. Why rental and not buying? If we're talking about workforce housing, especially if we're talking about town employees, why not the option for them to purchase, to build equity as they work and live in the town?
Well, typically, rental housing is a big part of a society overall. In this location, from our research, we feel that the rental housing makes the most sense. The for sale housing, typically, it's the character's different, the style is different, and the numbers would be very different as well. Another one of the things, whether it kind of matters or not, is when, from the community standpoint, when you do for sale housing, if we're concerned about, the state mandated 10% requirement, rental housing such as what we propose, all of the units developed count towards that number. If you do for sale housing, only, in this case, 25% of them would count.
Thank you.
Anybody got anything else? Mr. Liberty?
Going off of a point brought up by Mr. Berthium, that the buildings don't have elevators, I was wondering if we have an elderly resident that's trying to move in and say they had a bad lottery number or something, ended up on the 3rd floor, I was wondering how that process works if they...
That would all be managed up front, and we would, they would make provision in advance, because as the lotteries are done, all those provisions, there will be some part of it that if there would come a point where, as I'd said, say there's roughly 80 first floor apartments, we're going to get to that point where we'd be at 81 or 82 where, we'd no longer have that handicapped and accessible. There could be a move out in the future and then it becomes available, but at some point there's a limitation. What you try and do is in, the balancing act of making the numbers work and all. Elevators, if you will, typically to even make it work, the economics work, you'd have to be a minimum of 5-story buildings. That's one thing. Another part of the puzzle, as we, look in a suburban community, kind of more at the edge, we're trying to keep with a building style that's, more residential and not, getting real tall in nature.
One more. Last question. When you were talking about dog parks and different services that are offered, and even the hiking trails, I was wondering, are any of those things going to be open to other Auburn residents, or would all of those, including the hiking trails, just kind of be the community residents, and how would that be monitored?
There wouldn't necessarily, there's not going to be signs up that says, you can't go here. But, it just, by its nature, I think, of coming in and to the community and finding it where it would be, it wouldn't be something necessarily that would be advertised, per se. But, as I say, we've had, things we've done in other communities with large open space grants and all, where, you find that, people find it.
Yes.
Do you anticipate any further blasting to
Yes.
get this in? How much and for how long?
It's hard to say. There's actually, obviously, as we know, if you've been there, you've seen there's been a lot of rock for our entrance road going in. There's much less once you kind of get up on the property where, the actual apartment homes would be. But I can't tell you right now, there's exactly what that amount would be.
Would you commit to notifying the residents when you are blasting? So if there's a cessation of 3 months, will you commit to re-notifying them before you start blasting again, just so that they can be prepared?
Certainly. I mean, we've done a substantial amount of blasting over the last 3+ months, and we've had no problems. The neighbors, to our knowledge, always been aware. We comply with, every single rule and regulation, obviously, that you have to. I would say probably the best group to ask, unbiased, if you will, about our performance is talk to the Auburn Fire Department, because every single day that we've performed blasting work on that site, there's been a member of the Auburn Fire Department on site during that work.
I have talked to them, and there is no requirement for you to re-notify abutters. That's why I'm asking you. When there was a cessation of blasting, then it picked up in the spring, the residents were caught unawares, and I'm aware that the fire department has no complaints, but I have received complaints. So as we're talking, we're going from a very small footprint to a very large footprint. These details matter, and I know the residents have been very vocal at the planning board, and I would hope that their concerns would be addressed.
We're happy to do that. If we come up with, format in how to do it. The last thing, we're looking to do is impact the neighbors, anybody else. As I say, we're just working to develop our property. If we kind of set up the guidelines and all, and they make sense, we're happy to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, is anybody else, anything else? I just have one.
Still, Mr. Berthium has one when you turn your head that way.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'll let you get to your question in a second. So I'm looking at the map, and it looks like there's proposed right here 9 units. So we're looking at roughly, doing a little bit of math, roughly 30 units per building, so 10 units per floor on average. And you mentioned that that the, kind of the impact on cost for an elevator is around 5 stories. So if the town was, willing to let you go a little higher, maybe looking at a couple of the back buildings there, would you consider going up to a 5-story on a couple of the buildings and putting in the elevator, if that made more sense to the town to get more? And it doesn't necessarily have to be that every unit's handicap accessible, but having the elevator, I know my mother, 82 years old, she 81 years old, she's going to kill me. She doesn't need handicap accessible things, but she wouldn't want to walk up 3 flights of stairs every time, so.
We're happy to look at anything that makes sense. Absolutely.
Okay, just, thank you.
I guess just the concern I have is neighbor-friendly. Are the neighbors in the area, they know exactly what's going on, what your plans are, and are there going to be buffers? Are there going to be areas where these buildings are not sitting on top of the other homes in the area? The residents out there on Ames Street and Blaker and Albert, all of those, they've been there for years, and now this is something brand new and a big expansion, so we want to be sure that the neighbors are, they're happy with what your plans are.
You want the honest answer? The neighbors out there have enjoyed a 60-plus acre forest in their backyard forever. And the reality is, they're not going to like it, some of them, some more than others. And just being honest with one another, they'll come out and they will say all kinds of things. And as you and I talked briefly earlier, it's, all we ask is you consider the source and ask the question. We own 64 acres in the town of Auburn. All we're doing here is exercising our right to develop our property. We're not trying to hurt anybody or take advantage of anybody or anything like that. But, we'd be kidding ourselves to say that if somebody's home is next door and, we're 100 feet or 200 feet or whatever it happens to be, to think that they're, going to love that. And I'm just, as I say, to be fair and to be honest, we don't go around, in being developers, we don't go around trying to hurt anybody or anything. We also, this is how we make our living, and we also are in an environment here where, as a Commonwealth, we need the housing. So we try and will continue in every possible way we can to work with the neighbors. It is when you look at the exit after the fact, in my 30-plus years in Massachusetts, I've never had a case where we come in and propose something and not had people come out and say, I don't want this, it's too big, it's too much traffic, it's all of that. That's just human nature. But I can tell you the things that never get talked about or written is the people who come back after the fact and say, hey, you know what? That's not bad. And hey, I screamed at you because you were out there with a can of orange spray paint in your pocket and you were marking some trees that you were going to cut down. And I screamed at you saying, you can't do this and who do you think you are? After the fact, come back to me and say, you know what, thank you. You opened my eyes that my house was just getting all clouded in and the sun wasn't even shining, but that's what I was used to.
I think that's what it's going to be when they start to see that there's going to be infrastructure improvements, and then you're going to have a little bit of more motion in those neighborhoods. People are going to be around, be more security. But thank you very much for your presentation. I'll turn this over to our town manager.
Thank you. I just had one comment too, and just want to thank Eastland for working with us in getting all the information that we asked you to present tonight. I think it's helpful. The board needs to have this kind of data to make an informed decision. If there's any additional information to respond to some of the questions that came up this evening, you can get that to me, and I'll make sure we get it to the board.
That'd be great.
And just for clarification, mostly for anyone who's watching this is the first time that this has been presented publicly. So the neighbors, as of now, don't have, which is why we wanted Eastland to come and speak to the board. We wanted everybody to hear what this project is. There's been rumors, there's been discussions for a couple of years. It's time to get what the facts are and what the project is. So this is the first public presentation that Eastland has done specific to this. They've already been through the planning board for the 5-lot subdivision. That's a separate issue. But I also just want to clarify, this is, maybe that's my note that I'm done. This is a 75% market rate, 25% affordable, which means that, if my math is correct, approximately 63 units will be affordable, approximately 187 will be market rate, and we don't have a lot of market rate market rate apartment rentals. And again, with the affordable component to a rental, the developer can also access state tax credits for development, which gives the town the opportunity to claim 100% of the units. So while only 63 of them will be so-called affordable units, the entire 250 does go toward the town's count. And what we found was interesting, and I don't want to put you on the spot, and I'm not sure if, Clay, you might have recalled this, but the affordable rate in Auburn, we're not talking Section 8, and I want everyone to be clear on that. They're totally different income limits. This is low to moderate income, which the state and the governor has been calling workforce housing. And the initiative statewide is to make sure that people understand it's workforce housing. You have to have a job to be able to afford to live there, or you wouldn't be able to pay their rent. So
If I may
I think that's an
add to that,
important point.
This, I hate the word, I hate it, affordable, because as soon as you mention it, people go sideways on you. But the reality is, the 25% that we propose, you will qualify at 80% of the median income for the Worcester area, which is about $72,000. So at $60,000, you qualify. And where I come from, that's a long way from what we stereotype and we think about as the projects or those kinds of things. That's what we're talking about, and that's why, as you say appropriately, this is workforce housing. This is for the people that are, all of us are getting up every day and going to work.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in tonight. There's been a lot of information put out here. I'm hoping that we can see some of this on our website, get some of the information going, if that's possible.
Absolutely. I mean, we can put all of this on our website. We can create a link.
And as more information comes forward, to get it to us so that we can see a little bit more of it. And we'd love to have you come back when plans are set in motion. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next on the agenda tonight, we have a petition by the National Grid and Verizon for joint or identical pole locations on Albert Street. And we have a representative here from National Grid.
Yes, hello.
Before we get started,
Make a motion to open the hearing.
thank you. A motion to open hearing's been made. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay, we have all that information tonight, and we'll turn it over to our representative from National Grid. Would you identify yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you got going on?
Yes, hi, Steve Susi from National Grid. The poll petition here is to basically relocate 4 existing poles on Albert Street that go into the Blaker Street intersection. So this is all part of the development that was just presented, that Albert Street is being widened, and so they're trying to move the poles back several feet. Pole 8 is going back 5 feet, pole 7, 6 feet, pole 6, 3, and pole 5, 2 feet. Usually by law, if it's moved more than 3 feet, we have to get a new pole petition. So some of those are going back more than that, poles 8 and 7. And, just to let you know, the poles 6 and 5 might meet that standard, but it's part of the petition as well, to let you know this is why we're doing it.
Just by looking at this, Albert Street, it doesn't look like it's going to affect any traffic. You're not going to close the road down or anything, changing over poles. Will there be any impact to the neighborhood?
Well, no, I mean, the poles are there. They're just being wove back. There's some pavement here. I didn't design this. I'm filling in for someone who was sick. But it looks like they have already done some of the repaving. I think with the pole 7 is actually in the pavement by a few feet. So they've already started to do the work. Some of them are right up to the edge, and we're just moving it back.
There's not going to be any power interruption or anything, it'll just be moving the pole and bring the wires over to the other.
Yes, we're part of the plan in order to serve the development. From pole 4, that's three-phase, there's a business on that has three-phase power. They'll put three-phase going down Albert Street now to feed the new development. If there's going to be an outage, like anything, it's going to be a momentarily, maybe a day. They do a lot of stuff live line, so I can't really tell you for sure how much is going to be live line. What they'll probably do is put the new poles in, transfer the single phase wire, and then at some other later date, do the three-phase. Again, they might need to do an outage, but most of the time when we're affecting multiple people like that, we'll do a widespread, we'll notify people, and then this isn't going to be an outage for like a week or something. It's just a day and then, or a few hours, and then power goes back on.
Any questions or comments from the board? Being none. Are there any residents here? Are there any residents here from Albert Street area, Blaker Street? Okay. Well, then on that note, I'll ask for a motion to close the hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the petition as outlined in the memo dated May 7th, 2019, and the attachments thereto.
Is there any further discussion, comments? Being none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a motion to move up agenda item 7C?
7C. The motion been made for 7C to move up. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing that. Shannon Regan, our Economic Development Coordinator, is here. If I may invite her up, Mr. Chairman. This item is a follow-up to the wayfinding grant that we received. So if Shannon could just give us just an update on that grant, we're excited to get it. Shannon had actually done the application for $10,000, and we were awarded $15,000. So that was a very pleasant surprise to have that. So as part of that, we're seeking board participation on a committee that we're putting together. So I want to have Shannon explain it.
Thank you for having me. So, as Julie said, we applied for a Massachusetts Downtown Initiative Technical Assistance Grant. We got $15,000. The town planner and I met with Favorman Design, which was the consultant that was selected through the state, about a month back to get started on the process. So there will be about, it'll be a 6-month process, about 1 meeting per month or so. And typically in the past, what he has done with communities is create an internal committee, work committee, and then at the end hold a public meeting and a Board of Selectmen meeting. So that committee that we're looking to put together, which Julie and I have reached out to everyone on this committee, and we're finalizing now with hopefully a meeting in June. So it'd be the police chief, the fire chief, a DPW representative, the library director, who is also a resident, a member from the town manager's office, who's also a resident, Rachel, the town manager, the town planner, and I, and then a Board of Selectmen representative, and then a historical commission representative, which we have secured, basically with the intent of creating a branding and logo for wayfinding signage in Drury Square to go along with the other initiatives. And Favorman Design, he showed us some of his old work in other towns, and he does a really great job of blending historical items in town to current economic business. So it's an exciting grant to get.
Thank you, Shannon. So we would like the board to consider appointing somebody to serve on this committee for us. So that's why we wanted to come to you this evening. I mean, if you could do that this evening, that would be great, which is why we put it on there as a discussion and vote on it. But if you needed more time, we would respectfully ask that you do so quickly at the next meeting. We do want to start having the first meeting, I'm sorry,
June.
in June, so
What do you foresee for time for meetings? Is there going to be, how many meetings or?
So probably about 6 meetings, so on average about 1 per month. They vary in length a little bit. I think the beginning ones tend to be a little shorter, and then the word association and the final would probably be a little bit longer. We hope to have them during the work day, since most of us will be here, but we're open to try to figure out the best time for the majority of the committee.
Are there any interested parties for Mr. Carpenter?
I'd be interested. I can't do during the workday, though. That's the only thing. This has been a long, laborious project. Even when I was on the Economic Development Committee, seemingly forever ago. So congratulations on that. 5,000, also 50%.
Yeah, thank you.
So if we can arrange something even on a Monday at 6, I should be able to make that.
Yeah, we were actually thinking about Monday nights, so that would work.
discuss that, depending on what everyone's schedule is. It's a challenge to get, we're trying to get representation from other boards, and some of them meet on other nights, and that was the only night that we were thinking we could potentially not conflict with another board that we're trying to get involved in.
So,
I'll make a motion to appoint Mr. Carpenter to
I'll
this committee.
second that.
okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Carpenter, for stepping up for that, and thank you, Shannon. Thank
Yes,
you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dan.
Thanks for coming in. It's always nice to see you. Okay, back to our agenda. We'll go back to item 5. There's no communications here tonight. The Board of Selectmen general items under 6. We have gift acceptances. There's no gift acceptances tonight, and there's no proclamations or recognitions. We will go to town manager items, and item 7B, and we'll turn this over to our town manager.
Thank you very much. Once again, we have an opportunity to apply for a hazard mitigation grant through MEMA and Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. And this would be to apply for grant funds in the amount of $2,688, which, just so you know, is a formula-based. It is a competitive grant, but the amount we're allowed to apply for is a formula-based. So that's not a random number, that's a number we're given by the state. And we're seeking to use the funds in accordance with the grant requirements, which it is rather limiting what you can do with these funds, but we are proposing to do a functional exercise for the EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, which it's been a couple of years. We have a lot of new employees. We did a so-called tabletop exercise a couple of years ago with all our employees, and it was a fascinating exercise. We brought together school department, town administration. We had a facilitator come in, and we did a mock emergency situation. In that case, we did a pretend, I want to make sure everyone knows it was a pretend incident where a train went off a track and a hazmat spill occurred, and it was an entire day on how would you deal with that, how do you deal with the evacuations of the schools and notifications and information to the public, ambulances, transportation, buses. It's really a fascinating process to get through. We did it about 3 years ago, and maybe 4 years ago, and since then we do have quite a few new employees in those critical roles, so we thought it would be important to do that. So that's what we're applying for, and also we will be getting an iPad for the Fire Prevention Office, where they would be able to log and access all of the hazmat sites that they currently track, but to be able to have it on an iPad, they could actually keep it in the truck with them and use it on a mobile situation. So that grant, again, would be for $2,688, so we're looking for authorization to apply for, accept, and expend the funds.
Questions, comments? Being none, I'll ask for a motion.
I will make a motion that we apply for, accept, and expend grant funds in the amount of $2,688.
Second.
Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, now we have a tabled item under 8, discussion on the House and Senate bill regarding voting age for municipal elections.
I don't have anything new to add to this. I haven't looked at it in the last 2 weeks since our last meeting. I was wondering if we'd heard back from the principal of Auburn High. I know we were going to reach out to him. Was there?
I do not recall hearing back yet. Let me just double check on that. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm trying to remember all the emails that I
Right, so,
recently
yeah.
went through. It was about 2 weeks ago. Let me follow up on that.
That would have been the only new thing to add to that, so.
Okay. Board of Selectmen member items, we don't have any, but have any board members got anything that they want to bring forward? Being none, there's no public comments. And we have minutes from the April 22nd, 2019 meeting. Any errors, omissions, corrections, comments? Being none, I'll accept them as presented. And on that note,
Motion for adjourned. Second.
all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you and good night.